Hello, everyone. Joe here, broadcasting from Salt, Alaska. Today, we're going to talk about Bear Jr. We all know about Bear Sr. He played in the White Fang movie. If you haven't heard about him, check out my other podcasts and you'll hear his story. But Bear Jr. was Chippewa Black, just like his dad. And just like his dad, he was super smart. In fact, he was a little bit too smart, I think. I eventually named him the Insane Genius because he was truly a genius, yet in a strange way. But let me tell you the story, and it's actually about Bear, and and also about a cabin that I was searching for 3 years. The cabin belonged to Ernest Jacobin Leffingwell, and he explored the Arctic Alaska in 1906 to 1914. And his story was really interesting, really intriguing. So it all began one day. I was looking through some magazines and I found a picture of three gentlemen. They were sitting on a boat, I think they were sitting on, and they had a beautiful picture of a beautiful Malamute next to them. It's an old photo, 1906, I think is what it was dated. And it just caught my attention. I said, wow, that's beautiful Malamute, 1906. The dog looks like the Malamutes nowadays. They haven't changed much. Big, stocky, super broad. You can see the muscles. And so I got doing some research, and the gentleman's name in the picture is Ernest Leffingwell. And he was an Arctic explorer 1906 to 1914. And he mapped much of the Arctic. And as I got reading his story, I realized this man did quite a lot. I mean, he accomplished an enormous amount of work, and he actually funded his entire expedition. If we were to calculate how much personal money he spent on his expedition in those days, it'd be over $1 million. And he wasn't rich; he just raised it and worked for it. He was a trapper and a whaler. I mean, he did all kinds of things to make the money, and of course, he had funding, donations, but he accomplished quite a bit. And it's really interesting. I found was that the news media never, you know, wrote much about him, and he did more than the guys who struggled to the North and South poles as far as accomplishing anything. But the thing was, he never got hurt. He never froze his feet. He never got his arm ate off by a polar bear. Well, that's how the news media is. They like drama. They like a guy could go out there and not know what he's doing and gets hurt and nearly freezes to death. He's gonna be a hero. But Ernest Leffingwell, he knew what he was doing. But mostly, um, he had a lot of his friends were natives that lived, natives in Inupiat up there, and they basically taught him how to dress, how to travel, and he listened to him. He wasn't arrogant. He listened to him. So he did quite well, and I was really fascinated with his story. And I dug and researched, and I actually acquired his personal journals, copies of his personal journals, and copies of his maps. And I said, I'd love to go see what he saw. I'd like to follow his trail, basically, follow where he went. And so that's what I did. The first winter, um, I did nothing but train myself and the dogs, built gear, sewn, a lot of caribou fur clothing for myself. And the second winter, I took off in November, and I didn't see anyone that first winter for 5 months, not a living soul for 5 months. I mean, just dogs and I just traveled, and it was so interesting. I remember once I was going through a canyon, and it was cold. It was, I think, about 55 below. It gets cold in the mountains, much colder in the mountains than it does on the coast. On the Beaufort Sea, you have the ambient temperature from the actually seawater that warms the atmosphere actually, and so rarely you see it colder than 45 below on the coast. Yeah, the mountains you see 65 below for days on end. And one night we were traveling along, and I was snowshoeing because the snow is pretty deep in the mountains, and I was had a pretty good idea of where I was going. I was just basically following Leffingwell's map of seeing the places he's gone, and I had a journal, and it was it gets dark. The sun doesn't come up in the winter. Um, in the dead of winter, the sun is gone for about 72 days, basically at dusk, and so you're traveling in the dark a lot. And when it's moonlight, that's kind of like your daylight when the moon is up. And it was a moonlight night, and I entered this canyon, and the fog was just rising, the uh, above the canyon walls. So I figured, well, there's got to be open water someplace around here. There's much fog around here, but nonetheless, I kept trucking along in my snowshoes, and I felt, I thought that ice was good. I mean, the snow was on it. Usually, you can tell thin ice if there's, you know, you can usually see it. Um, but it caught me by surprise, and I went through ice. Luckily, it wasn't very deep, and got my snowshoes all wet. I got all wet. I mean, I was sopping wet. It was 55 below, and so I dragged myself ashore and had the dogs follow me and set up camp and got everything hung up inside the tent and dogs put away and fed and everybody bedded down happy. And I got reading Leffingwell's journal, his personal journal, and he was describing this place, a canyon, in a cold night and fog coming up, and they fell through the ice. And I got looking at his map and his description, and it was exactly where I went through. And I was camped about the exact spot where he had camped. The land doesn't change. It is so interesting. The land never changes. It's always the same. You always get the same, thin ice in the same areas, the warm springs in the same areas, the same crevasses in the same areas. It never changes. And this was 100 years gone by since anyone had been up there with a dog team, more than likely, and fell through the ice. But that was really, it was just really interesting, really interesting. And this is where bear comes in. Someday we'll go back and we'll talk about the Leffingwell expedition. But this particular story, I got to tell you about Bear, the insane genius. And he was totally genius, but he was truly insane. And during this time, during the Leffingwell expedition, every year I went to search for his cabin, Leffingwell's old cabin. It was on an island. And every time I tried to find it, I'd get hit with a blizzard and something would get me I'd be blown back to shore. And I never could find that darn thing. Finally, on the third year, I said, I got to do this. Last year, I'm going to be doing this expedition. And then I'm going to go do something else. And I was traveling way out. We were out on the sea ice where it was nice and smooth. You get close to the shore on the Arctic Ocean and Beaufort Sea, it gets jumbly rock. The jumbled ice and everything like that. So I got way out there, nice and smooth going, just beautiful. And we're cruising along, and I looked, south, and I could see a blizzard coming. And you can usually see these blizzards quite a ways away on the horizon. And usually, if you time it, you got about 45 minutes to an hour from the time you see a blizzard to the time you better be dug in. And it depends on the fierceness of the blizzard. But this one looked pretty mean. It was already blowing some pretty good gusts. And so I was just saying, I'm not going to find this cabin again. I mean, this blizzard's going to hit us, and we gotta get in the shoreline and take cover. And Bear was my leader, and I didn't really need to walk in front of the dogs at all. Bear would just, I got to tell you how he navigates too, but we'll get to that later on. It's incredible how he navigates. But I turned the dogs toward the shore. I told Bear G, which is right, and he did. And then the guy was smarter than I was. And then way off towards shore, you could see a little black speck, and that black speck is a log usually. And what happens was the logs come down the Mackenzie River in Canada. They fall in logs into the river, and then they drift out and they catch a current and takes them west, and the logs will hang up on the shoreline of Beaufort Sea. And so beautiful firewood. I mean, it's the best firewood in the world. You got all this dry spruce timber along the shoreline. I mean, can't beat it. And so Bear spotted that little black speck, and he knew that it was time to camp because I always went to a piece of firewood or log when it come time to camp. And so he just zeroed in on that log on the shoreline, and we took off. I hopped on the sled, and he just went for it. And we made it to shore, and I set up camp, and no sooner I got the camp set up, the blizzard hit, and it just pounded me all, the rest of the day, all night, the following day, and I don't know if probably none of you've been in a blizzard before, but it's tough. I mean, it's tough. I mean, the dogs got it made. They just let themselves be buried in snow, but you still have to feed them, and you can't see any more than a foot or two in front of you. If you were to take a white plastic bag and put it before your eyes, that's all you see, and just white. So you have to tie a rope around your waist, and I tie a rope to the sleds, and I start crawling out to the dogs, and each dog I have to, they wake up, they jump all over you, all happy and excited and slobbering all over you. Meantime, you're dragging a bag of dog food, trying to get them some dog food, and you got to dig a little hole. So you have a little shovel with you, and you have a little dig a hole and put the dog food in a hole so they can eat it. Otherwise, the dog food will blow away. So you have to do this to each individual dog. And after about an hour, hour and a half, you finally get it done. You got to do this a couple times a day. Plus, you got to get firewood, and you got to dry your clothes. I mean, it's a lot of work, and you got to make sure your tent doesn't blow away, and you wouldn't live long after that. So after a few days of this, the wind stopped, and so of course, you have to always dig yourself out. I mean, very rarely you'll be blown clear where you can just walk out. So I unzipped the door, and there was nothing but a white. But I was managed to punch my fist through the top of the door, and I eventually worked a big enough hole to get out the top of the door and slide down the drift. And just got looking around, getting ready to feed dogs, and off in the distance, I saw something. It looked like a boat. I thought, it must be a shipwreck or something around here. I mean, they're everywhere on the North Slope in the Arctic. And but it looked a little bit strange. So I said, well, I'm going to go walk up there. And for much of you who have never been to the Arctic, the distance is really deceiving. Sometimes you can see, a willow, let's say, and it'd be, 5 feet away. It looks like it might be 100 feet away. I mean, a lot of times, if you see like a rock, you think it's a big, hill, a mile away, and vice versa. Sometimes you see a hill a mile away, and you think it's a rock right next to you. The distances are really deceiving, really, really crazy sometimes. Depends on the light. So I started walking towards this, what I thought was a broken down boat, maybe on someone dragged up from the shore, and I walked for quite a while. It seemed like about a mile, and it ended up to be the cabin, Leffingwell's cabin, one I've been searching for 3 years. So, so that's the cabin story. Now Bear, this is where he comes in. He was so smart. that anytime we need to go anywhere on the coast, that along the coast on the sea ice, there's little snow drifts, and they run usually east and west. So if I had to set my GPS to go, a certain coordinate, I could get him started on that coordinate, and he would watch those snowdrifts, and he used those snowdrifts like a compass. If we're going straight across the drift, he would watch those as he ran and made sure that we stayed straight across those drifts. Never wandered. I never had to give commands right or left. And then same thing if we're going, maybe quarter across the drift, he'd keep that, you know, coordinate. I mean, it's amazing, amazing how he figured that out. But he was left-handed, very left-handed, and so he would sometimes wander off to the left a little bit too far. We'd be going along good, and he'd start favoring his left side, and we'd start inching away from my coordinate. And you set a coordinate that's 40 miles away, and he starts inching away from it. You're going to miss it. So I'd always have to stack a couple of dogs on his left side. A couple other dogs that would kind of keep him in line, or I'd put him in the middle. So, but he was so smart in so many ways. A lot of times when I would make camp, usually, as the sun was setting, I always went towards shore to make camp. And this guy, he knew. So as soon as the sun was setting, he'd just take a right and head towards shore. And it's like driving a car that, automatic, like a robot. He knew exactly what I planned on doing before I even thought about it. And then also, if he saw a log along the shoreline, Beaufort Sea shore, and was close to camping time, the sun was starting to go down and starting to get dark, he would go out of his way to get to that log because he knew that, we wanted that log. That's where we camped, a log or something. And also one of the strangest things he did was he always took shortcuts. If he recognized a place we had been, let's say he recognized a mountain 20 miles away, and we were kind of heading towards it along the Beaufort Sea, he would start heading towards that mountain because he recognized that mountain as a campsite or some place where we've camped before. It could have been, 2 or 3 years prior. The guy I swear he had a photographic memory, and he was just brilliant. And that is Bear Jr. And, just like his dad, just a smart guy, but he did have some quirks. Holy smokes, he had quirks. But, that's what they say about geniuses. they have a lot of quirks. So, I mean, we're continue on about this Lovingwell expedition now that you got me going on it. But I just want to tell you a little about Bear, and then we're going to the Leffingwell expedition. Like I said, the first year I went 5 months without seeing people, and I saw some amazing countries, and amazing northern lights in the Arctic. It's just, I mean, it's incredible. It looks like a painter is just painting the skies every night, all kinds of different colors, purples and pinks and reds. It's just, the Arctic is a really special place. It's very different than what you can imagine. I mean, you have to be there. You can't describe it. The photo you see on the screen, that's what's left of Leffingwell cabin at that time. I think since that time they've made it a historical monument. But in the dog team, you see that's Bear in the middle. You can see the little guy there. Looks similar to his dad, but he's a little bit smaller. But he's still inherited his dad's brain. So we're gonna continue this Leffingwell expedition story with all the dogs and characters that were involved. So until next time, God bless and think like a Malamute.